Good morning. This is working. I'll start today off with a poem by Gary Snyder. It's a poem entitled, "On Climbing the Sierra Mountains Again After 31 Years." Range after range of mountains, year after year after year, I'm still in love. This is an American haiku, an English adaptation of an ancient Japanese poetic form that's about nature or a scene from nature. This poem also lets us see some of the components of intellectual wellness. Snyder shows us his need to be constantly learning in his life, mostly by describing his wanderings through the Sierra Nevada of California. He also lets us see new ways of seeing familiar scenes to him. By looking at these scenes with new ideas in mind, mostly by his hiking and climbing, he goes through and talks to us about new discoveries he's made through these old scenes and how to describe them in new words. He also opens up a new version, a new way of creativity through his words that conjure up the photographic images of Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, and Morley Bear. He extends his creativity by compressing a vast scene of mountain ranges into 3 short lines of poetry. Finally, he describes for us his need to be current with current events. His environmentalism is his big one. His hobbies, his hiking and climbing. And also through the music of his poetry, he lets us know about his need to be in nature in its purest form. So how do these ideas relate to intellectual wellness? How do we see intellectual wellness through these ideas? Well, several things are in mind. Oops. Oh, slides are not, that's okay. Several things are in mind. First of all, lifelong learning is a big issue for intellectual wellness. Also, the need to be open to new ideas. Creativity also plays a big role in how to express that creativity. Keeping up on your reading is also a great way to be keeping your intellectual wellness sharp-tuned. Keeping up on current events, as I mentioned earlier, is an important way to be intellectually aware. Hobbies are an important part as well in how we express ourselves through our hobbies. And finally, attachment to the arts in some way, shape, or form, in my way, is through music. And we'll talk about that later. When I was trying to get this talk together about a year ago for a different audience, I discovered that each of us is more engaged in intellectual wellness than I really thought. So to describe intellectual wellness, it seemed right to talk about my own discoveries as I made this talk. So for me, lifelong learning is a prerequisite. Whether I'm brewing beer or reading classics, I've really accomplished a lot, but I have a lot more to accomplish in my lifetime. And to get to that stage, I'll have to learn new tools to do that. And learning these new tools definitely adds to my lifelong learning. For example, I just completed a 4th year of a yoga class. 5 years ago, I would never have thought I'd be on a mat for exercise and relaxation. Being open to new ideas is also an important prerequisite. In 2009, my wife and I moved to the inland Northwest from northern New Mexico. This was a huge culture shift. The only way to adapt to our new land was to be open to the new idea of living in a new culture, so we did. We've really enjoyed doing that, and still enjoy doing that, but the only way to do it is to be open to the new ideas of where to live and how to live there. Creativity is not always something earth-shaking that's expressed in an eloquent way. I'm a bicycle commuter, and that offers me some personal creativity on my commutes to and from work. On my commute into work, I ride down South Hill, and I experience something called blur time. The blur time allows me sharp focus in front of me so I don't crash. But the blur time itself is when the peripheral vision actually blurs a little bit because of the speed going down a hill. It's kind of my version of impressionism. But at the end of the day, it all turns around. It goes uphill, and it can be an uphill grind. But it also allows me a slower pace so that I get to see the detail that was in my blur time before. So I get to see what happens in the spring to the trees when the leaves come out. and in the summer when the leaves really are full, and even in the fall when they start to wither and fall off the trees. Another thing I really enjoy is watching the quality of light change from summer to fall, like right now. It's my favorite time of year. Reading, or my need to read all the time, I try to read all the time, but it's not always, I'm not always successful with a book in my hand. I tried when I got here to be involved in a book at least once a month, or at least every month, with the hope of trying to finish that book every month. I don't always make it, but at least I try. I teach in the Executive MBA program at Washington State University. The class I teach is leadership. That course is heavy on reading, and the first part of that course centers on the literature of William Shakespeare. We read the plays of Richard II, Henry IV, and Henry V, but we do it in the first week of class. So that requires me to prepare a couple of months ahead of time. I have to read Shakespeare pretty slowly because I'm not versed well enough on Shakespeare's English, and it's definitely not the English that I learned. So I take my time to get to that. This sounds like a chore, but it's actually a true joy. I really enjoy digesting the literature of Shakespeare and trying to make it my own language. Without reading, without satisfying that need, I wouldn't be able to make my goal, and that preparation for class allows me to do that. It also motivates me for my reading commitment after class is gone, so I'm able to get back to my reading goal, or at least try to be. I also have a constant need to be up on my current events, and I think life without being up on current events is pretty lonely, pretty empty. It can also be a real chore to figure out which current events to follow. To do part of that, I read a lot of magazines, such as Science and The Economist, mainly to keep up on national and international perspectives on technical issues, and also the social impacts of those issues. I also read the local newspaper, and I'd like to say daily, but I don't make it every day. But I do that to gain the local perspectives on some of the national topics that I follow. I'm an avid listener and contributor to National Public Radio, and mostly because of their depth of broadcasting and their breadth of programming. So this sounds like a pretty heavy dose of current events to keep up on, but without those current events, I'd lose that wholeness that they bring, even when the news isn't all that good. Hobbies for me are an interesting category. My trusty Oxford Dictionary defines hobbies with a few words, such as entertainment, amusement, and diversion. And while I agree with those words, my hobbies are also true passions. I have a couple of examples. I talked about my cycling and my love of cycling in Spokane as a commuter, but I also cycle south of town on the Palouse, and sometimes north of town in the mountains, and I love those. So those are entertaining, sometimes amusing, and definitely diversions. But they're way beyond that. They're my exercise program. They're a way of life for me. So I call those passions. I'm a home brewer too, and nothing excites me more than to concoct a new recipe, brew it, and then have it really taste good. That's really exciting. Home brewing, though, is a really physical activity, even for home brewers. So another hobby, yoga, has been able to help me keep my flexibility and strength going so that I can brew safely and efficiently. Yoga as a hobby has provided that flexibility and strength. It's also provided a way to relax that I didn't think possible. So you can see that my hobbies, beyond entertainment and amusement and diversions, are a way of life, or are ways of life for me. And I think no matter how we define our hobbies, we'll see that those are intimate parts of our intellectual wellness. Connecting with the arts is really an important part as well of intellectual wellness, and I connect most closely through music. Music could be classified for me as a hobby, but it does go beyond that, and I call it an elemental part of my intellectual wellness. We all have these things called brainworms. It's a fragment of music that gets stuck in our brains for days on end. I seem to harbor a long stream of these brainworms that are just waiting to invade, and it's annoying sometimes, but that's the way it is. Beyond these brainworms, though, there's a vast literature of music that's ready to be performed or listened to or enjoyed somehow. Excuse me. I listen to a lot of music. A lot of that lately has been through the living classical composers, trying to understand it and really relate to what they're doing. I also listen to a lot of not-so-living classical composers and jazz musicians and even popular artists as well. So I do listen to a lot of music, but I'm also involved in the music scene here in Spokane. I'm the vice president of the Board of Trustees for the Spokane Symphony, and that board really shapes and designs some of the work that the symphony does. So not only do I listen to the symphony music, but I ask the questions about how that music is performed and how that music being performed affects the community within which it is performed. So my attachment to music goes on beyond a hobby, and it certainly is a central part of my intellectual wellness. I think it also allows me to engage more deeply with the community and find a deeper wellness or a broader wellness in that. So I read a lot of poetry as part of that literature I need to continuously read to fulfill my intellectual wellness. A poet with whom I worked in New Mexico, Carol Moldau, wrote a poem about a bird watching experience she had in central New Mexico. And I think that poem is a really apt way an important way actually to end this particular talk. The photograph that I now see on the screen is of that same area. The poem is set in a wetland or a marsh, which in Spanish is called a bosque. This bosque is home to hundreds of thousands of birds during the spring and summer migrations. And in the wintertime, it's home to thousands of birds as they winter over into spring. The poem is called Bosque del Apache. Winter. Scratchy branches flame upward, stiff as ratted hair. Crows crown the tops of trees, black buds that waiting to bloom in unison, only to fly. At dawn, the marsh is busy as a skating rink. Ducks land in squadrons, swim in pairs. Geese honk to be let by. Like them, we are stalled in traffic, caught in a cavalcade circling the 15-mile one-way tour loop, binoculars in every lap. We scout to see what we're missing and end by missing what we're seeing. The sky is so busy and so vast. Lavender orange masses of clouds lit from below stealthily surge and disperse, while from farthest east, daylight's dark stars flap their wings and assume they're shifting constellations, only to fly over us, crossing the sky like undulating velvet ribbons trailing. Each bird a basted stitch puckering the sky's pale blue satin smock, each flock an endless stream of thread the seamstress forgot to lick and double knot. And so it goes. A V of cranes unravels, rivaling the geese for noise. I hope I've been able to give a bit of an illustration and illumination of what some of the components of intellectual wellness are, especially from my own point of view. I hope I've been able to challenge you as well, to look into yourselves and see what you do that actually supports your own intellectual wellness. Thank you for your attention.